A woman's arm was crippled. A man broke his leg jumping from a runaway stagecoach, and a prophet began vomiting blood. Today, I'll share with you two stories that show that God is still in the details of our lives. If you're someone who loves real stories of courage, miracles, and quiet, unwavering faith, then you're in the right place because that's all I do here. I share powerful, true stories that remind us that God is still in the details of our lives. If that sounds interesting to you, then please subscribe. And the next time you are eating one of those little boxes of single pack raisin servings and you get to your last raisin, take it out, then look up at the like button and hand them your last raisin. All right, let's get into today's stories. Philo Dibble sat in his chair near the window of his home and, picking up the book that he had brought with him to read, leafed through the soft pages, feeling them turn as he turned through each one, getting to the spot where he was going to read. As he began to read, he noticed something moving out his window, and looking up, he saw a man and a woman walking past. The man was holding the woman's arm, and as they walked, Philo noticed that the other arm of the woman was crippled and bent at an odd angle. Now, the man and woman passed out of view of Philo's house, and he went back to his book and to his reading. Even though he just saw them pass, he knew why they were here. Their names were Elsa and John Johnson, and they had traveled about 40 miles from Hiram, Ohio to Kirtland, Ohio to see the prophet Joseph Smith. Elsa was wanting Joseph Smith to heal her arm. She'd been afflicted with something called rheumatoid, or more specifically, what we know the name of it now to be is rheumatoid arthritis. For 12 years, she'd been unable to lift her hand past the level of her eye, and in doing so, any kind of movement would cause severe pain in her joints and in her limbs. So every time she went out to try and hang the clothes that were freshly washed on the drying line, she was unable to do that. Not only were the clothes heavy from being wet, but her arm was also severely weakened from this affliction that it had. And so she heard about Joseph Smith because when he came to Kirtland, his fame spread like wildfire and went everywhere, even though he hadn't publicly been doing any healings. Yet she still heard about him and she convinced her husband to make the trek to Kirtland to go see the prophet. And that morning, the Johnsons were on a walk to go see Joseph Smith. They got to the meeting place, which was the Newell K. Whitney store. They opened the door and walked inside and saw surrounding a table a group of people. One was a Methodist minister named Ezra Booth, another was a doctor, and then there were others as well as Joseph Smith himself. Now, Joseph Smith met Elsa and John Johnson the day before because immediately when Elsa came to Kirtland, she sought out Joseph Smith, went to him, and asked if he could heal her arm. Joseph asked her in reply if she believed that God gave power to man to heal her and that if God could heal her. She said yes. And then Joseph said that he would, but on the next morning. In order to understand how healing happens by Joseph Smith and in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have to know that healing happens by the priesthood of God, not by some witchcraft or sorcery, but by actual power that God gives to man to act in his name. And it's the same power that God used to create the earth and the same power that Jesus used to heal people when he was here on the earth. This priesthood power was restored to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in 1829 when Peter, James, and John came and visited them as they were praying about how to do ordinances such as baptism, and they restored the priesthood power to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. Typically today, when someone is administered to with a priesthood blessing, it's by a member of the church that holds the priesthood, laying their hands on the head, and then at times using consecrated oil to help heal, and then speaking the words in the prayer or the blessing as they feel directed by the Holy Spirit of God. Now, before this standard procedure or process came about of laying the hands on the head, the healings were much done like how Christ healed or how Peter and John healed a lame man outside the Jerusalem temple walls. One day, Peter and John were walking through Jerusalem on their way to the temple, and they get to the steps and they look over and they see this man that's just laying on the stairs. And as people would walk by, he would ask them for gold or silver just to help him get the necessary funds he needs to eat and survive because he's not able to walk. And so Peter and John walk past him, and he asks them for silver or gold. Peter turns to him and says, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee." He then proceeds to grab him by the hand and tell him, "In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, I command you to rise and walk." And then he helped him up to his feet, and the lame man who couldn't walk, who had been laying on the stairs for years begging for money, got up and proceeded to walk into the temple. He could walk from then on. Much like that healing was done, it's the way that Joseph Smith and others in the early period of the church went about doing healings. And then over time, it became more custom and necessary to put their hands on the head. All of these miracles, though, the ones done by Christ, by Peter and John, by Joseph Smith, are done by the priesthood power, which is the power that God gives to man to act in his name on earth. And so Elsa had heard about this power. She had heard about Joseph Smith. She convinced her husband to make the trek down to Curland, and here they were in the Newell K. Whitney store with Joseph Smith at the table. They walk over. John pulls out the chair for his wife. He sits down and he helps scoot it back in. Then he pulls out his own chair and he sits down and they engage in the conversation, which at the point when they walk in is surrounding the supernatural visions, revelations, all of those things, and whether or not they exist and actually happen. At some point during this supernatural discussion, one of the members around the table looks at Elsa Johnson and says, "And here is Elsa Johnson's lame arm, and has God given any power to anyone on earth to heal her?" And after that, the discussion moves on to other topics. The members are still sitting there around the table. Elsa's still there, Joseph's still there. When all of a sudden, Joseph Smith stands up, pushes his chair out, walks confidently over to Elsa Johnson. He grabs her by the hand, and then in a solemn, confident manner, he looks her in the eye and he says, "Woman, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command thee to be whole." And then Joseph promptly leaves the house. He didn't want to be the spectacle of attention, and so he just leaves. Everyone is stunned in silence because of what just happened. The way that Joseph spoke with calm assurance and confidence, and then the way that he just left. They all turned their eyes to look at Elsa, and as they do, they see her stretching out her arm that had rheumatoid arthritis, straightening it, and then she stretches out her other arm, she straightens it, and she says, "This one is as good as the other one. There's no difference between the two." She had been healed. The next morning, Philo Dibble was at home, preparing for the day, when suddenly he hears a knock on his door. Not expecting anyone, he goes to the door, wondering who has come to visit him, and he opens the door and sees a doctor standing there. This doctor had wanted to come in. Philo let him in. He could see that the doctor had something on his mind. He was visibly like anxious to speak. So Philo let the doctor speak, and the doctor shared all the circumstances surrounding the story from the day before when he was there in attendance at the Noah K. Winnie store when Elsa Johnson was healed. He described the circumstances to Philo, and he said it was the excitement of the moment, the way that Joseph came over all of a sudden, and the perspiration and of the waiting for this event that caused her body to heat up and the cords in her arm to be relaxed, so she was healed. Philo, however, knew upon hearing this, there was no way that was the case. He knew that it was the power of God. He subsequently thanked the doctor for coming and telling him about the story, and then Philo rented out his farm and devoted all his time and attention to serving in the Church of Jesus Christ. And he always made himself ready throughout the remainder of his life to do whatever the prophet Joseph would ask of him. Philo knew that God had healed her. In a May morning of 1832, Joseph finished his preparations of preparing the horses in the stagecoach by walking through the horse house, paying special attention to the harnesses and the bridles, making sure that they were connected correctly, and that the horses were correctly connected to the stagecoach. He and his companion, Newell K. Whitney, were traveling today from Independence, Missouri, back home to Kirtland, Ohio. After Joseph finished making sure the horses were ready and connected to the stagecoach, he and Newell finished loading up the wagon, and then they got on the seat and they started their journey with a yah. The horses began moving and trotting to their new destination. All was going well until all of a sudden, Joseph and Newell were lurched back in their seats and they saw that the horses were speeding off, not listening to any commands to slow down. They were booking it as fast as they could. They'd been spooked by something. Knowing that they needed to get off the wagon as soon as they could because it was careening back and forth, Newell and Joseph got up, got to the edge of the wagon, squatted down, and prepared themselves to jump, looking ahead to see if there was any grass or something that was a little bit softer than dirt that they could jump on. Now, keep in mind that while pulling a stagecoach, horses will probably go somewhere between 6 to 9 miles per hour. Unless they're trotting, then maybe up to 15 miles per hour, so not too fast. But when a horse is spooked, they run as fast as they can. So pulling a stagecoach, a horse, especially if it's in a team, would probably get somewhere between 25 to 30 miles per hour. We're used to that today because we drive in cars that go much faster than that, but back then, that was like as fast as somebody would go is on a horse that's galloping. Pulling a stagecoach that's wiggling back and forth because of the speed, and they need to get off. So as they positioned themselves and waited for that time, they saw the grass come and they jumped. Joseph jumped, landed hard, rolled a couple of times, and then sat up and looked to see where the wagon was continuing going. As he brushed some of the dirt off of himself, he heard an agonizing scream coming from the wagon. Getting up and rushing over to the wagon, Joseph saw that Newell K. Whitney was underneath the wagon. The horses had stopped at this time, but Newell was underneath the wagon and obviously in severe pain. He was hurting terribly. His face had gone white, and upon closer inspection, Joseph saw that his leg looked to be broken. So he carefully maneuvered him out from under the wagon and got him some water to help with some of the shock and sat with him for a minute. Looking at his leg, he could also see that not only was his leg broken, but his foot was also broken. After Newell could speak, after he took some deep breaths, he told Joseph what had happened. He said that he had jumped at the same time as Joseph. However, his coat had got stuck on the stagecoach, and because his coat got stuck, it forced his foot to go down into the turning wheel of the stagecoach, which then pulled him underneath the stagecoach, breaking his foot and his leg. As soon as he was able, Joseph carefully put Newell onto the wagon and then rode the wagon and took the horses to the nearest town where he had a friend, and they would end up staying the next 4 weeks or so at this friend's house while Newell recovered. Joseph stayed with Newell, attending to him and helping him as he recovered, and he also developed routines of his own. Every night after dinner, Joseph would go walking in the nearby woods just to have some time to ponder and think. One day, while Newell was laying in bed resting, he heard someone stumbling through the house, and suddenly he looked up, and at his door was Joseph. And Joseph was ashen and pale. There was blood on Joseph's mouth. It looked like he had been attacked or in a fight. As Joseph stumbled closer to Newell, he could see that he really needed some help. So Newell slowly started to get himself up to a sitting position so that he could help his friend in whatever way possible, even with his leg that was still recovering. As soon as he was able, Joseph asked Newell to administer to him with a priesthood blessing. Newell gave him a blessing, and then when Joseph was able to speak, he asked Joseph, "What happened? What happened to you?" And this is what Joseph said had happened. He said that he was eating dinner like usual, and then, also like usual, he got up and went to the woods to go on a walk. When suddenly, when he was there in the woods, he just started heaving and vomiting. and vomiting so hard that it was collapsing him to the ground, and he couldn't feel anything. His ears were ringing. Soon, he started vomiting blood and poisonous material that he could see on the ground. Concerned that this was coming out of him, the blood and the poisonous material, but he could do nothing about it. His body was still heaving and retching. At one point, he retched so hard that he felt a searing pain in his jaw and in his cheek, and he heard a loud pop in his jaw. And reaching up, he could tell that his jaw had dislocated. So Joseph reached up with both of his hands and popped it back into place, and they continued to heave and vomit. When he was able to, he got up from the ground and started stumbling back to the house, knowing that he needed to go see Newell and ask him for a blessing. He staggered into Newell's room, asked for the blessing. Newell administered to him, and immediately Joseph was healed. He stopped heaving, and he wasn't bothered by the poison anymore. A few days after this, Joseph came in and went to talk to Newell, knowing that his leg is not 100% healed yet. He still is not really able to walk, hasn't really made effort to walk on it. Joseph told Newell that if he would get ready to leave in the morning, that they would go together and they would take a wagon to the ferry at the river. They would take the ferry across to get on a larger boat, and they would get on that larger boat and be going up the river before 10 a.m. Now, Newell, still not in 100% function with his leg, agreed to go. He got up the next morning, got ready for the day. They went out. They found the wagon waiting for them. They got on the wagon. They rode the wagon to the river. They found the ferry waiting for them. They rode across the ferry and found the boat waiting for them. And by the time they were traveling on the boat up the river, it wasn't even 10 a.m. Just as Joseph said it would happen, it did. Joseph Smith was healed. Newell ended up becoming healed, and they were able to find passage home because God is still in the details of our lives. Thanks for watching. That's it for today's stories. If you got something out of it, let us know in the comments below. And if you like this format, also let us know. And if you have a miracle that you've been a part of, or a tender mercy, or a story that you know of that you would like me to feature on this channel, please fill out the form in the comments, and we'd be happy to put it on the channel. And remember to hit the subscribe button, and the next time you're eating a little box of personal single-size serving of raisins, and you get to your last raisin, look up, the like button, and then give them your last raisin. See you next time.